All right, we are joined now by Tulsi Gabbard, who is joining us live. Her book, For Love of Country. I'm saying it because I just saw your Instagram story saying that we got to get this thing on the New York Times bestsellers list, which, look, I have, as someone who's been involved in that situation before, I'm tracking how things are going. And if for some reason it doesn't, then I smell collusion.
Right.
I'm just saying because they can't ignore what's going on with your book because it is really taken off. It feels like every day I'm just seeing tons of posts about it.
Thank you so much, Logan. I have heard many stories about the New York Times editorial boards, the bestseller board, whoever the body is that makes decisions. They don't even claim to try to be fair. They say that ultimately it is an editorial decision. But as you know well, we need to make it as hard for them to make excuses about why they're going to keep this book and, more importantly, the message that I'm delivering in this book off the list. So we got 6 days before they make their announcement and make their decision, and I really want to make a big statement about the New York Times and give them the opportunity to be fair. And
I think if you make enough noise, I believe they will be, because I know the stink that will be caused if they don't, and we can see again. Thankfully, in some sort of modern society here, we can kind of look and see how these books and these projects do, and we can track where your book is going, and we know that it should be making those lists. So we'll see. We're praying for you. We're hoping for it. We're telling everyone to go get it. But why we have you here today is we also, which is part of your book, kind of where some of this funding is happening. We've seen now we're weeks into these campus protests. We just saw George Washington University, the police finally do their job, clear out the encampments. But the reports have been surfacing over the last few days, and we've discussed it on this broadcast of where that funding for all of this comes from. And of course, it comes from maybe the sources that people will start screaming conspiracy theories as soon as you start saying where they're coming from. But and I know that these are coming from a very specific section of society, if you will.
It is. And when it's directly connected to so many of the other failed Biden-Harris policies and initiatives that we've seen across the country, this same group of billionaire donors who are supporting President Biden's reelection campaign, who are funding so many of these anti-Semitic, pro-Hamas protests on these campuses, are the very same people who are behind the defund the police effort. They're the very same people who are behind pushing these so-called progressive prosecutor policies that ultimately favor the violent criminal over the victim of a crime. So we look at what's happening in these cities across the country where they are pouring not hundreds of thousands, but millions, tens of millions of dollars to fund campaigns like those of Alvin Bragg in New York City, like those of the progressive prosecutors in Philadelphia and Los Angeles and New York City and Chicago. The policies that are actually hurting people, undermining the rule of law, and really disrespecting completely the role of our police and their job, their responsibility to enforce law and order. There's a reason why they are doing this, and there's a reason why President Biden has been so hesitant to call out what is very obvious to the rest of us in this country, specifically with these campus riots. How hard is it to stand as president of the United States and say, we should all, as Americans who love freedom and cherish peace, stand against these anti-Semitic attacks. We stand for the protection of free speech, even speech that we don't like, as long as you are respecting the peace and upholding the rule of law and order. And also, we as freedom-loving Americans stand against the radical Islamist ideology being propagated by terrorist groups like Hamas, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, ISIS, Boko Haram. The list goes on and on. They have been waging this ideological warfare for hundreds of years in a very calculated and systematic manner. We are seeing the results of that warfare on our college campuses today, not only in America, but in many countries in the West. And President Biden lacks the courage to speak the truth about this threat of Islamist ideology, whose goal is to rule over the world through Islamic law, because he's too afraid. He's afraid of being called an Islamophobe by the pro-Hamas elements within the Democratic Party, whether they be members of Congress like Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib, or they may be voters in different pockets of the country. This has been a problem not only with President Biden, but many other Democrat leaders, again, who refuse to take a leadership role and stand for freedom, to counter this ideological warfare with the superior ideology rooted in our Constitution and our values and principles that are based in freedom. Again, they are too afraid. People who make decisions and live their life in fear have no business being in charge of and responsible for the United States of America, serving as president and commander in chief.
Tulsi, we've got about a minute and a half here. I did want to give you the opportunity again because I do want people to get the book. I have it right here. Go pick it up. Tulsi Gabbard, For Love of Country. Leave the Democrat Party behind. And I think this is an important time for people because you need to hear voices like yours who have seen what's gone on in the country and realize that we are headed in a wrong direction. And even if it was a direction that maybe at some point you may have thought was correct.
Wherever people stand on their politics or their partisanship, or whether we may agree or disagree on different issues, it is critical that we stand together on the common foundation of freedom that makes us who we are as Americans. That is what is under threat right now. That is what is at the core of the message and experiences that I share in my book, For Love of Country. And it's what must motivate us to act in this election, to stand together, to defend freedom and the right for us to live in this open marketplace of ideas and a democracy where our voices rule the day. Thank you so much for all the support. Go out and get your copy today.
Tulsi Gabbard, For Love of Country. She'll be back on, I'm sure, next week, and we will have to break down what the New York Times did or did not do. But I am hopeful. I believe